Hello and welcome to Bastion Land Broadcasting, where tonight we are looking through a game that, well, I say game, an adventure module that has gotten me very excited lately, which is called Neverland. But I do also have to confess that I have a ulterior motive tonight because, as you may have noticed, we are running slightly later than the usual schedule tonight. And the reason for that is I have a thing that I can reveal at midnight tonight, which is 1 hour from now in the UK. So at the end of this stream, after an hour from now, I will be revealing something, and I'm going to stop because the whole point of this is that I can't talk about this yet. So in the meantime, we've got a RPG read through, which is something that I did a few of a while back, and people seem to really enjoy it. And I was waiting for something to really grab me because I didn't want to just do a read through of a game that I was so on. I didn't want to do a read through of a game that I didn't enjoy. So I was just kind of waiting for something to grab me. And last week when I spoke about the Ennies, I spoke about how one of the covers that was nominated for Best Cover at Ennies did actually get me to go out and buy the book, and that was Neverland. And it's not quite fair to say that because the reason that I bought this book is that there is a very thorough review by Ben Milton on Questing Beast on YouTube. If you go and watch that, he does a read through of sort of the whole thing page by page. So I don't want to just do that because, I as much as I might try, I cannot be Ben Milton. But I thought instead I would look through and sort of latch onto a few specific things that I think are really cool about this. And specifically, if you're not familiar with this, as you might guess from the name, it's based on Neverland from the Peter Pan story, and it is a sandbox setting. I think the closest comparison, if you're not familiar with this, I think the closest comparison would be something like Hot Springs Island, which was, again, a sort of island-based hex crawl, and I know that it's cited as kind of an inspiration for this game. I keep calling it a game. It's a setting, but isn't the setting really the game? Let's not go too far into this. So I should say this is by Andrew Kolb, and it is technically compatible with 5th edition D&D. But I have some thoughts on that we will get to when we are discussing mechanics. In fact, no, I will say it now because I know that when I spoke to some people about this after I picked this game up, I spoke to a few sort of people about the game and asked what they thought about it, and I had a number of people tell me that they sort of thought it looked cool, but then they didn't buy it because they thought it was just a 5th edition splat book essentially. And I'm sure that there are many more people that did buy it because it's a 5th edition splat book. But if you're one of these people, and I suspect maybe if you're watching this channel, you might be more interested in systems other than D&D 5th edition. Even if 5th edition is a huge turn-off for you, I would check out this because you could kind of scrub this off. I might do that on my copy. I might just put a little sticker over here instead and say use what you want, because that's what I would advise for this. Anyway, let's crack on. So, first of all, the book looks great. There's sort of that's plain for you to see. But what I'm really talking about here today with this adventure is what I look for when I look for a published adventure. And I am in a weird situation. I suspect a lot of you are in the same situation as me, where I would probably almost always rather write my own adventure rather than use one off the shelf. Obviously, I do a lot of writing, but I think even before I sort of had messed with systems, I think I always wanted to design my own worlds, design my own adventures, dungeons, make my own monsters. That seemed like a big appeal of running RPGs to me. So for an actual book to make me want to run that setting, it has to do a number of things. And this is quite a long list, but I'm just going to go one at a time. The first thing it has to do is it has to make me want to run this setting rather than something I would have just come up with myself. So what I mean by that is it has to do something that I wouldn't have thought of ordinarily. And even though I am familiar with like the Peter Pan story, I've seen Hook a great number of times. That's probably my biggest exposure to the Peter Pan setting. I would never have really thought of using it as an RPG setting. So it's doing something interesting straight off, but it doesn't just go with that. It isn't just straight. It's kind of set a number of years in the future of Neverland. So some of the children characters from the stories are now, in fact, quite old adults. And some things have changed in Neverland, but it's still recognizable. And I think it gets that balance just about right, where there are enough little tweaks that it's not just a straight port of the book, but it's still very familiar. And aside from, I don't have a huge affection for Peter Pan story. Really, it's not really something I'm hugely sort of familiar with. But the one thing I do like in RPG settings is this sense of kind of wonder and this sense of kind of fairy tale logic. And this game has a lot of that, which we'll get into. But let me get back to my list. The first thing it needs to do is it needs to make me want to run it, which it does, and then it needs to make me feel like I can run it, because sometimes something will be really imaginative and really interesting, but then when I sit down and try and look at it, I think I don't know how I would run this. It's either too complex, or I feel like it's just not something that I could do justice, or it's badly laid out, or the good stuff is hidden away in just paragraphs of text. But here it sort of hits you with what you need straight away, and this is a good example. So what's going on? So this is a sandbox style setting, and with a sandbox you need to have things that are happening, really. You don't really want a sandbox to be, I mean, it's tricky, and that this is probably something I should write a blog post about, but you don't want a sandbox to be too static. I know it helps if everyone kind of stays in their place, and everyone has, not necessarily stays in their place, but if all of the factions have layers that they're kind of based around, and you want a degree of kind of reactivity to the setting where the players can wander around and explore it. But but you also want the world to feel like it's full of hooks. And a really good analogy that I've heard is you want the world to feel a bit like a powder keg. And the characters are like the spark that's going to set something off. So this game does that really well, because it summarizes all of the factions straight away, and all of the factions kind of have something that they want and something that's happening right now. Romain says borders and points of conflict. Yeah, you want the factions to have relationships, alliances, rivalries, enemies, but you also want them to be. It's kind of tricky to do it if it's just an absolute free for all and everybody hates everyone. So there's lots of deals to be made here, and yeah, I won't go too far into the factions here, because they're sort of, they get a little bit more detail written up in the cast section, but it is nice to have this kind of summary at the start. And also I like that you get kind of there's a little bit of a how the hex crawl works type thing. One thing that's going to come in later on is a hex is about 4 hours to pass through, and we'll remember that for later on. So that's our kind of introduction to the factions, and then we have an introduction to the island and how it works. And I think this is where it got me, this 24 hours in Neverland, the island's routine. When I saw that the author was taking care with this sort of thing, it sort of made me feel like, it made it feel like this is it's simultaneously, it feels like the island is like a real place, but I like that it almost runs on clockwork. It says the island runs like clockwork on a 24-hour cycle, and everybody kind of follows this clockwork. So it's this kind of fairy tale logic of that I think with this sort of game, it's quite useful to embrace, because in a way it's a lot simpler than trying to simulate nature. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's all this talk about like dungeon ecologies and having like a really realistic setting. I think, in my experience, I find that kind of thing really hard to make feel right at the table. And the same with like timekeeping. I know there's that classic, the game has no meaning if strict time records are not kept. Well, for my kind of games, it doesn't matter too much, the kind of games that I play at the table. But when you have things like a world that essentially runs on clockwork, and there are these chime hours where these chimes sound out and nobody knows where they come from, and depending on where you are, something happens on that hour. To me, that feels more usable at the table, and it feels kind of magical and fairy tale, mysterious, and I do like that sort of thing. Now, this is the first example of where you start to see some like 5th edition stuff sneak in, and when I was reading through, there's a section on flight, obviously, because Peter Pan can fly, and my understanding is anybody can fly with the aid of pixie dust. But then we've got like some stuff about difficulty challenge ratings, and it all feels very 5th edition D&D. And when I read this, I thought, is it going to be all like this? But this is a very specific use of this sort of 5th edition systems. And if I was running the game, I'd probably find a way to do that without necessarily engaging with the rules quite so much. And this feels a bit like an outlier. I don't mean in a bad way, but it feels like when I read this, I was expecting it to be lots of like D&D rules for everything. But most stuff is kind of handled without rules. It's kind of given to you as like, this is how it is on the island. And it reminds me of some of the stuff that I've been trying to do with this primordial system that I've been talking about. And in particular, the idea was kind of expanded on Sam's blog at Dreaming Dragon Slayer. And he spoke about a world that has laws. And this feels very much like a world that has laws. I'm not going to repeat his whole blog post, but sort of about engaging with the laws of the world rather than the rules of the system. And then everything is just nicely given to you in these little tiny packages, and each one feels like it's full of hooks. Like the fact that pirates have parties, it's described in an interesting way, and it makes me want to like use that. And again, just lots of weird little hooks, which I like. And an explanation, yes. So when I got this book, I thought, what are they going to do about? I have not read the original source material. I'm basing this purely off the Disney cartoon. But I thought, what are they going to do with the native inhabitants of the island? And because it's not handled well, let's say, in the Peter Pan books. But making them into Dryads seems like about as good a modification as you could make for that. I think it's handled, from my point of view, which admittedly is not necessarily the important one, it feels like it's handled pretty well. So we also have some rules for scavenging, and it's rules for stuff that you might need in a sandbox game of this type, like random encounters. And I'm not going to dig into the nitty gritty of the rules because they all seem pretty solid. I think seeing how they work in play would be the real test of it, but that's not really what I'm here for today. Instead, one of the bits that absolutely impresses me, let me just fix the spreads, there we go, is the cast section. So again, it's a small thing, but I just like that it's called the cast rather than like a bestiary, because it just sets the tone that there are some like monstrous things in here. And this is again where I feel like it sort of bumps up against the 5th edition thing, because it feels like a lot of you wouldn't necessarily want to fight a lot of these. They feel a lot more like fairytale monsters that need to be overcome in a specific way. So let me find an example. So the very first one So I should say, this little symbol here means that these are creatures from, I've already forgotten what it's called, like the fairy realm. So these are not necessarily encountered in Neverland itself, unless they're sort of visiting. But again, I should have practiced saying this word out loud before we went on air. Abartax, undead fairy dwarves, slain by Queen Mab's guard. They hunger for magic and seek vengeance. Placing their bodies face down can defeat them, and iron will hold them in place. So in this small little paragraph of text, you've got like 3 hooks already. So they hunger for magic and they seek vengeance. Immediately you've got like a drive. Placing their bodies face down can defeat them. So like the reverse thing of putting a tortoise on its back. If they lie face down, they can't get back up. And iron holds them in place. They can't move if they're held in iron. And that is just cool already, because it just makes me feel like an encounter with these is not going to be about just, beating them up. It's going to be about the fact that they hunger for magic, they want vengeance on Queen Mab, and they have this really silly kind of fairy tale weakness. And even the stat blocks are very much, in terms of the numbers themselves, this is where they kind of link in with 5th edition. Saves are handled slightly differently. Again, I won't go into it, but the saves are handled slightly differently, but it's still like compatible with 5th edition. Obviously I'm going to say like, oh well, they should have used Into the Odd or Electric Bastion instead, but nobody's perfect. And the fact that it's 5th edition, even looking at this, I don't think it matters too much, because this is pretty slim, this stat block here. You'd need to like adjust the HP, because that's pretty high, and your hit dice, and you need, armor class is kind of easy enough to use for other systems. Most of the like special rules and stuff are just like Magic Warhammer just does extra damage, and it's only magic while the Abartok wields it. And if they bite you, you have to save or lose use of a limb for 1 minute. Like that doesn't need to be a 5th edition D&D thing. Losing the use of a limb applies to any system. So if you're getting put off by the 5th edition thing, don't worry about it, because even if I had to build this monster from scratch, I feel like I've got enough to work with here to make it work in systems, in whichever system I wanted to use. The blue men are the other one that like leapt out at me. Now, again, I don't know much about what's being drawn here from the Peter Pan book and what's like original, but these blue men, their origin is unknown. They attack in groups and typically target human structures. They hate boats and sailors. Completely mad and think themselves smarter than everyone else. They sleep face down in water and are frequently mistaken for dead bodies. So again, it's just like full of hooks. Like, if I rolled this encounter, immediately you would know what to do. Either they're floating in the water and it's like a trick. If they hate boats and soldiers, so are they trying to sabotage a boat or something? And then they have like, even the stat block, which is like, even the mechanical chunk of the stat block, which is like the least interesting thing usually for me. It's just got cool stuff in it. It's got, they use a water blade as their weapon, which is just like a cool flavor thing. And it's not described. All it says is destroyed on impact. But the game trusts you to work out that I'm assuming that they make a blade out of water, like they pull it out of the sea. But it trusts you to do that. It doesn't have like a 5th edition style like paragraph explaining the logistics of this blade. And the whole rhyme thing, they'll say a rhyme, and if you don't rhyme back at them, you suffer mental damage. And it gives you examples. So it's just proper fairy tale bullshit, which I am here for completely. yeah, hides his eyes, says with a rules light game, you can just look at something like this and convert it in your head. And that's what I always say when people ask me for like a conversion guide for like Electric Bastion and or Into the Odd. The whole point of that system is that it should be simple enough that you can do it in your head. And I know that it's not that easy for everyone if you're new to the system. But I would advise like just getting used to it and, and sort of practicing it early on. So the crocodile is a gigantic crocodile. It's like a big demon thing. And some of the more important like monsters and NPCs here, they have personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, and proficiencies, which are, again, this is all D&D 5th edition stuff. But if all 5th edition stuff was like this, I'd be all over it, because the proficiencies, intimidation, I think, is like a standard proficiency, but then it's not like protecting the island and finding prey in the water. It's a little bit more loose. It's a little bit more like trusting you to know when to apply their proficiency bonus. And yeah, the ideals, bonds, and flaws, I don't like how they're implemented in 5th edition, and I don't like the whole inspiration mechanic. But I think they're pretty... I prefer them to just a straight-up alignment, if I'm being honest. Having that, saying that the crocodile cares for their family, and they believe that a healthy island makes for a healthy nest, and they're arrogant and believes itself to be immortal. Those three things tell me more than just saying that it's neutral because it's an animal or it's evil. You know what I mean? And yet it wants things. It wants to end Captain Hook, and it wants to eat the great white bird, and it likes its routine. Don't we all? So yeah, it's cool. And yeah, they've made a big crocodile interesting without giving it a load of like fancy legendary abilities and stuff like that. Like, it's got a few little tricks that it can do when it's fighting, and it does have like the equivalent of legendary actions, but the interesting stuff is in how it's presented, I think. So I'm not going to go through every page of these monsters, but I sort of glanced through this section, and I'm going to just like pick out the bits that I like. And I don't know where these are from. Anybody that like knows the Peter Pan book inside out, if you have an idea of like how many of these things are actually from the book and how many are like new things, that would be cool. I know that there's some like I apologize for my pronunciation, but Catsea, is it? I know this is like a sort of Celtic, Scottish thing from mythology, but I don't know whether these feature in the book. Yeah, the Elfheim, is the elf home, I guess, the land of the fairies. And there's just some good description. No one knows where it came from. One arm, one leg, one eye, one club, and so on. It, much like its appearance, will have a singular goal at a time. It only speaks in one-word sentences, and it mostly wants to be left alone. So, I know I'm going on about this fairy tale stuff here, but I like anything that guides behaviour. Anything that tells me how this monster is going to behave in a really short, simple way is useful to me. And saying that it only has one goal and it speaks in one-word sentences is pretty cool. And I haven't actually read this. It's got lots of... It's silly gimmick monster, but I do like this now and then. So because it's based around the number 1, it's immune to area of effect magic. All its numbers are 1. That it must have been so annoying that they couldn't get the speed to be just using 1. I guess it would have been 10 or 100, wouldn't it? Oh, I feel bad looking at that. That's like so close to just using the number 1. The club drops the target down to 1 HP. Only damage dice rolls of 1 actually deal damage to the Fakan. Yeah, so it's kind of silly, but I like it. Dave in the chat suggests that a lot of them are from tangential stuff to the Pan mythology. Yeah, so rather than just fairies like Tinkerbell, they've sort of taken like other types of fairy, I guess. I recognise some from like Celtic mythology, but I'm assuming some of them are from other sources as well. Now, I've gone on my rant before about giant ants, and I can't remember. I steal so much stuff from Arnold Kemp that I can't remember whether this was my thing or his thing. But there was this idea that like giant ants are kind of like the least interesting enemy in classic D&D because you can't talk to them. They're completely alien. If they're defending their nest and you're in their territory, they just want to kill you and they'll never stop. And they're fast and it's just like you almost like a death sentence for rolling them. And there's been lots of attempts, one of them by Arnold Kemp, to make giant ants more interesting. And I think here they are pretty cool because they are like a proper little society. So they have like a proper like feudal society. They're like not quite feudal. They're like a kingdom. They have personality. They can communicate, and it's such a simple. If a monster is really uninteresting, allow them a way to communicate with the characters, and you'd be surprised how often that makes them more interesting. The one that always surprised me, I don't know whether this was just a weird quirk of 3rd edition, but the Otyugh like could speak common, I think. And I always thought like looking at this monster, it's just like a weird monster that lives in like a pile of rubbish. But I kind of want to hear explain yourself, Otyugh. Tell me what's going on. They're actively exploring the island's tunnels to conquer the land of the fairies, and their ideals are efficiency and order. So again, it's such a small thing, but it just makes them a bit more interesting. And the thing that I really like on these, let's go to the soldiers. Where are we? Here we go. So the giant ants all carry these pheromones, and they can spray green that smells like the colony, yellow communicates a resource, and red communicates danger. And each of the different types of ant will like react differently to the different pheromones. And it doesn't really say it here, I don't think. It doesn't suggest it, but it's so obviously setting you up for like you should trick them by using the pheromones. But it just gives you the tools, and it trusts the players to like work out what they can do with it. You don't need to say, oh, and if the players decide to use the pheromones, there's this many % chance it'll work. No, just give them the information and let them work it out. The gnomes are just like fairy tale gnomes, like the gnomes that would come and like help the cobbler fix their shoes. But I like that they are gullible and overly trusting and quick to dismiss negativity, because it just feels like they're dying to be like led astray. The great white bird is the other like big monster on the island, along with the crocodile. And it's got like a cool kind of protective thing over all the other birds. Captain Hook, of course. So the pirates in this setting are kind of interesting as well. We'll get they're kind of like, again, it draws a little bit on like, I guess, like Pirates of the Caribbean, where the pirates are cursed and they turn to skeletons in the daytime, except Hook, who can stay alive. And it goes on, it fits that whole thing of like the island running on clockwork. So like at sundown, all the pirates turn back to bones. And it reminds me, that whole clockwork thing reminds me of, I did a video ages ago, last year I think, about the Outer Wilds, the video game. and that's kind of based on it's completely different, but it kind of has like a similar thing of like the sort of the setting feels like a clockwork machine that's kind of like you can learn its tricks and like exploit it. And I think that's, if you're going to be playing in a sandbox for a long time, being able to like master the world is such an important thing. And yeah, if I'm going to add like one thing that like bemused me still, like it's so weird going from like all these quite grounded, I'll say grounded, it's a giant bird, all these things that feel like very simple and like elegantly designed, but then Captain Hook has like 200 HP, which is just a 5th edition thing. It's still to this day like feels weird to me that like I get that we're not gonna do the HP discussion. We've already fixed it with Into the Odd and Electric Bastion Land anyway. So all of the Darling children, so like Wendy and her 2 brothers, I think, they are all grown up now on the island, and John Darling has become a lich. The mermaids are like, they have like a trading company, like a sort of East India company that they're secretly running, and they sort of pretend to be vapid, which is, I can't work out whether I think that's like, it's silly, and I think I just come out on the side of liking it. And yeah, they're essentially just like greedy capitalists pretending to be vapid mermaids. Peter Pan, of course, and I like his flaws. Just says see personality traits because he's such an annoying prick anyway. He's brash and confident. He demands respect, rude and dismissive of others, quickly forgets names and easily distracted, hates boredom, lethargy, defeat, recalls any success to be his own even if he wasn't there. And he thinks the children he brings to the island are better off away from adults. So you could definitely do a campaign where Peter Pan is your antagonist, perhaps even like your outright villain, and that appeals to me. So because the pirates are dead and cursed already, every time you kill them, they like learn from the experience and come back stronger next time, which is something I'm surprised I've not seen before. Because it's just a really cool thing, because it fits so much of what you want in this kind of sandbox. You want there to be an escalation, so that means the pirates are getting stronger. You want there to be recurring encounters. You want to feel like, you know, you're learning the island. So seeing the same pirates gradually get stronger each time you kill them is just like a perfect fit for this style of game. The pixies. This has like the line in here that I really like, and it was one of the first monster descriptions I read, and when I read it, it just really clicked with me that like this is how I like my characters to be described. Like, give them one really clear thing that's going to affect how you portray them at the table. And where is it? I've said all this, and now it's here we go. Only able to feel one feeling at a time. That one line does like so much legwork, if you imagine like how that would be. So like, no matter how you're feeling, if something makes you scared, then you are 100% scared. And if something makes you laugh, you are now 100% tickled. And when they feel that emotion, it changes their colour, and they get a new spell that they can use. And the icing on the cake of this entry, because this is like, this Pixies entry like sums up everything I like about this. The icing on the cake, when it has a spell, it doesn't say like, see Player's Handbook page 400. It just tells you what the spell does. Teleport self 30 feet, and it just trusts you to do it. Increase target's armor by 3 for 1 minute. It just trusts you. I had not realised that the Samiad is in here. It takes me back to there was a Samiad TV program when I was growing up. I got a quick blast back of nostalgia there. So yeah, I could talk about these monsters all day, but I'm going to try and like move on to the rest of the setting because there's a lot of stuff in this book. The spiders are cool as well because they're like, again, they're not just giant spiders. They have a society and they're intelligent, even though they're unlikely to talk or be civil. But they are intelligent, and they're sort of serving the pirates. They have like a sort of, they have like a kind of relationship of convenience with the pirates. And each of the types of spiders has like different proficiencies. So I like that there are spiders that have diplomacy and strategy as their proficiency. So I guess they're like the opposite. No, I guess it's a theme, I suppose, because the mermaids are like pretending to not be as savvy as they are. The spiders are pretending to just be like dumb animals. So the Twylaeth Teg are the sort of the indigenous people of the island, and are represented as Dryads, and they have their own thing going on because they have like an intergenerational conflict where the elders are kind of like Ents in Lord of the Rings. They're just like very slow, and they're very slow to act, and they think the young Dryads are too brash. So they're kind of interesting. It's drawing on cliches, but it's drawing on cliches that work and fit within the setting, I think. So let me sort my spreads out again. Here we go. So the island itself is presented in a really clear way. If you've read Hot Springs Island, it's a similar deal. It's a relatively small hex map, but each hex is full of stuff. And remember, we said each hex is a 4-hour journey. So you're not going to be crossing the entire island in one day unless you're flying. And each hex gets a little reference here, which is handy. But then the actual descriptions, I really like that each one fits on a single page. And it should be so obvious, but like it doesn't always happen that way. And there is some repeated content between pages, so I'll just like flick through. So each like hex gets its own page, and there is some repeated content. But you'd always rather have that content there. I don't mind repeated content in a book. When it's actually repeated in a way that's useful to you. And each hex has its own thing that happens on the chime hours, which is 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. It has its own table to roll on for exploration, has its own creature tables, area effect tables, NPCs that you encounter, and just a little relatively short description here. And it's all quite broad strokes here. If you sort of sat down to run this and you just sort of, it does ask a little bit of you to like fill the blanks here, which I personally like, but I can see why some people would find it like daunting. So I think if you're going into this, it does pay to be a little bit prepared going in. I don't think you could just like leap into this with like zero prep. But yeah, I love the format, and it's just a joy to like flick through in physical form. Like just having like everything you need on a spread. It's not even a spread, everything you need on 2 pages. There is one exception which I will complain about in a moment, and it's such a small complaint. I've said before that I don't want to do read-throughs that are like negative, but it's just like one little tiny thing that's nagging at me, so I am going to point it out. And I'm sure there's a reason why they couldn't do it, but it's something that would have really helped me out. So you've got interesting occasions. I'm not going to like dig into them. The chime hours thing is kind of cool. Like I've said, it fits the whole clockwork thing. And they tend to just be little bits of flavour. There is a lot of just like atmosphere stuff as well. And now when I first read through this book, when I saw, let's say we're at Hangman's Tree. And let's say for our encounter, we roll area effect, which means we roll on this table. Let's say we roll a 4. A lost boy trap. Now I didn't realise, maybe if this was bold it would have helped me out. I didn't realise that this lost boy's trap, I thought this was just telling me to like make up a trap. So I was thinking, oh okay, so you're imagining like a kind of poorly made trap that like a boy would make. But most of these things, like that it sort of points to, things like Lost Boy Trap and Mountain Trap and Tilworth Teg Ward, all these little things are actually referenced. I will come back to Elfheim. All of these things get detailed later on. I'm jumping through the book because this was my experience. I wasn't expecting them to be in here. Here we go. There is a huge section of tables at the back that covers things like fairy trades, lich wards, adventures, animals, creatures, mermaid games, which is another thing you might roll on a random table, mountain traps, we saw that one. So where are my Lost Boy traps? I'm guessing these are in alphabetical order. Lost Boy traps. So if we roll an 11, it's a leg snare. But you might also get a fake snare, or poison darts, or quicksand. And these tables, I kept hitting points in the book where I was like, oh, it's exceeded my expectations here. These tables massively exceeded my expectations. There's so much like juice in these tables. And yes, I would have liked perhaps something more interesting than 40 gold pieces, like duplicated across 4 results. But I think it just, stuff like this for a sort of sandbox setting just makes it feel real in the same way that like that procedural generation does in like a sort of a roguelite. It feels like it's a world that exists on its own. You got rumors, you got plot hooks. So Star Surge, so when there's a falling star, you can use it to boost magic, and it basically gives you like a wild magic effect. One of my favourite pages in the book as well, where wandering strangers, what are they doing and why do they do it? So let's pick some random numbers. Say they were escaped goblins. They were knocked out, shoved in a box, and then taken somewhere far from home. And what are they doing? They're unsure. They seem to be panicked, confused, or a combination of the two. And why did they do this? Guilt. It weighs heavy. They'd done something wrong, and they only wanted to make it right. And some of these like tie in with people as well. So pressure like applies to another character. So this whole like resources section is great. But I skipped a huge section here, didn't I? So we had our like hexes, but then we had Elfheim for one. And Elfheim, like I say, is like the fairy world. And it has like all its own rules as well. So it's like it's a different place. It's literally like off the map. And it's kind of like randomly generated. Again, I think Gardens of Yin by Emmy Allen is like an inspiration here. I think that's listed. But you just have a load of different regions and you sort of randomize your way through them. So it makes it feel like a kind of unreal place, which I appreciate. And then at the start of this resources section, this is the one bit that like bugged me. It only bugged me because I want to use these things. There are extra things that are in each hex. So hex number 4 has these 2 coral caves. The crocodile, there's a map. There's like a 1-page dungeon for being inside the crocodile. There's a 1-page dungeon for the nest. There's a 1-page dungeon for the cunning camp, who are like the cunning folk are like these old people, old people nomads that like live in the mountains. There's a 1-page dungeon for the forge, which is in hex 17. But if I go to hex 17, it is called the forge. But you wouldn't know from looking at this page that there is a Forge one-page dungeon later in the book, and it's just a tiny little thing. I genuinely might actually get out my pen and write on this page, like just somewhere down here I'd put like see also page whatever, where the Forge gets a proper write-up, because yeah, it's just like a weird little organizational thing, and that they're also not in order. So the only reason I'm pointing out this negativity is just to prove that I'm not doing a paid advert here. I'm not saying that this is like a perfect book, but I feel like if you are interested at all in running a sort of hex-based, hex crawl sandbox with like interesting factions and lots of fairy tale bullshit, this for me is like a must buy. It's also ridiculously cheap. Like, I don't get how. I think, to be fair, it has been made through like a very large publisher, so I think there's some economy of scale going on here. But it is also very affordable. So if you are on the edge, I would say check it out. If you want something that has like that fairy tale feel, while also being like a fully fleshed out sandbox, then this is something that I would absolutely recommend. So that is Neverland by Andrew Kolb, and yeah, that's it. We are going to have a very quick 5-minute break, and then when I come back, I can start to gradually move towards this midnight announcement. But before I finish, I will just repeat my general idea that Neverland, if you want a fairy tale sandbox feel, check it out. But for now, we will take a very quick 5-minute break, and then I'll be back, and I will be able to be 10 minutes away from the big announcement. So I'll see you very shortly. Bastion has always been the only city that matters. In its industrial age, it sits as the smoke-shrouded hub of mankind, surrounded by a world of lurking horrors and cosmic interference. The underground spreads beneath our feet, and the stars loom above. You are an explorer, braving places too far for maps and too old for records. Your expeditions touch the bizarre, wondrous, and horrific. You search for riches, but also arcana, mysterious devices with unnatural powers. Prepare yourself for a rules-light, flavor-heavy game of industrial horror and cosmic strangeness as you venture into the odd. So, that is that. I can finally talk about this. So, Into the Odd Remastered is going to be a collaboration between myself and graphic design and layout work by Johan Noor of Merkborg fame. And it will be distributed by Free League of everything fame. And I've spent so long like not talking about this that now it's like it's weird to be able to actually say out loud. But it will be going on Kickstarter. 21st of September. The book is kind of already done. This is just a mock-up. The writing and the layout is basically done. I've said before about how I like to do Kickstarters now. I don't want to do a Kickstarter where I then have to go and do a load of work after the Kickstarter. So everything's kind of done, barring like final like polishing. And it's going to be a hardback, full color, nice, glossy. Well, not actually matte rather than glossy, but that's a whole other thing. Yeah, it's going to be a very nice book, hopefully. I can share a few little insights. This is a remaster, I want to make that clear. So what I wanted to do, there were so many people who, after I did Electric Bastion Land, they were still very excited about Into the Odd, and I didn't expect that. I kind of expected that when I did Electric Bastion Land, Into the Odd would kind of like fade into the background. But there were still a lot of people that were like wanting something to do with Into the Odd, and wanted to keep that game alive. So the idea of giving it like this big overhaul and but sorry, not really a big overhaul, more like a sort of giving it a new lease of life. So the rules are going to be the same Into the Odd rules. I'm not changing them to the Electric Bastion Land rules. There are one or two little things that I've snuck in from Electric Bastion Land, but it's very small little things like deprived, that rule, and bulky, things that don't really, things that don't have a huge effect on the game, essentially. Those have snuck in, but for the most part, I've tried to preserve as much of the original text as possible. Tim B is asking the big questions about, did I fix the bone magnet? Yes. One of the things that I did change is I've rewritten most of the arcana, and there are now more of them. So when you get a starting arcanum, you're rolling d66, so you're getting 36 rather than 20, and I've given them an overhaul because I wasn't happy with how a lot of those were working. It's still willpower and not charisma. This is how you know I'm serious about like preserving the the thing, because if you've spoken to me about willpower versus charisma, you'll know where I stand on that. But I thought I would stay faithful and use will. The world is still the setting is the same. The art brief, there'll be more about this as we go ahead. I don't want to like give everything away straight away. The art brief to Johan was to make it look like a kind of weird old book. So there is a lot of like weird, like garbled public domain, like old book art that's been kind of brought to life. The other big sort of expansion, I guess, is the Iron Coral was the starter dungeon in Into the Odd, and it will be 3 times as big. So it will have 2 extra floors, which are at least as big as the existing floor. So it's going to be 3 times the size of the dungeon in the previous Into the Odd. And on top of that, the Fallen Marsh, the sort of hex crawl that's based around this dungeon, that's been fleshed out a bit as well. So there are like a number of little mini dungeons hidden away inside there. And finally, the other sort of big addition is the Oddendum. I still cannot remember whether it's Oddendum or Oddpendium. It's Oddpendium. The Oddpendium is expanded as well, so there's some extra stuff in there that you might have seen it before if you were in on some of the very early Into the Odd support. Yohai, I know that you in particular will be excited. It's 2 extra floors to the Iron Coral. So the Iron Coral, and that will have a 3 floor dungeon. And there's a little glimpse of that. And that's quite enough of that for tonight. What I will do is I will pop the link in here, because the Kickstarter goes live on the 21st. The Kickstarter goes live on the 21st first. I'm trying to talk and get the link at the same time, which as you know, I can never do. The Kickstarter goes live on the 21st. It will run for 30 days. However, you can go and sign up for the pre-launch page now, which I've just popped in the Twitch chat. I don't know if you can see that in I don't know if you can see that in your if you're in YouTube chat. But yeah, asking about Mark of the Odd licensing, that's going to stay. It will change slightly because it's no longer going to be. The short answer is it'll be fine. I'm doing a slightly revised Mark of the Odd. The content is going to be the same. It's just like the licensing changes. It's replaced Lost Pages with Bastion and Press, and that's kind of it. People asking about whether specific rules have changed. In general, if you ask me about what has a rule changed, the answer is no. So I'm still using I'm not using the multiple attackers thing from Electric Bastion Land. I'm using the old system because I'm still like so conflicted as to which one I would use at the table. So I want to give people like the choice. But yeah, Mark of the Odd, that will all be cleared up. If you're unclear, if you're on Discord, hop into the Bastion and Discord server and feel free to shoot me a message and we can talk about that. But the licensing will all be the same. And yeah, that's kind of it really. Show the rules page? No. Only because I don't have all of the screenshots done properly yet. When the Kickstarter launches on the 21st, I'm hoping to have like a preview PDF ready by then, so you'll be able to see the it'll be like certainly the gameplay rules portion. Asking me why I'm conflicted about multiple attackers, it's only because it's I like the simplicity of the way that multiple attackers work in Into the Odd, and I prefer this kind of the slower pace of how they work in Electric Bastion Land, but it does add complexity. Yeah, go to bed. Yeah, I mean, I should. I'm up past midnight, which isn't something that happens very often. But yeah, I've been very excited about this project. It's been really good working with Johan. I'm incredibly happy with how it's looking. Just another couple of quick things about the Kickstarter. What I am not doing is I'm not going to be doing any. Let me get my thoughts straight. There's not going to be some of the same fancy Kickstarter stuff that there was with Electric Bastion Land. So there's not going to be guest authors. There's not going to be, get your face on the cover, this sort of thing, because I kind of wanted to like preserve the integrity of Into the Odd, which sounds very pretentious of me, but I get a sense that this is what people want. Like people wanted like something that was largely representative of the original game, rather than me trying to like jazz it up in any way. And as such, the stretch goals are going to be mainly there for my sanity. So the stretch goals are all going to be digital only. So the book is going to be the book, no matter what we hit. There might be changes to do with like the build quality of the book, but that's just going to happen anyway. I don't want to artificially put things like that in stretch goals, because like if we can do a ribbon, we'll do a ribbon. I don't want that to get locked out because of some silly Kickstarter thing. So the Kickstarter stuff is just like me writing more stuff that will go in a post-release PDF. NetJogging asks, will the font size be bigger than Electric Bastion Land? I doubt it. I feel like the Electric Bastion Land font is quite big. Any question, the beauty of this is, so with Electric Bastion Land, I did the layout myself, which you can probably tell. But here we have an actual layout person doing it. We have Johan. He's doing anything to do with graphics. It's him, and obviously that's his bread and butter. So yeah, that's it. So you can follow the thing. I'm trying to see. I was hoping I would get. It's telling me that my follower. Oh, we have 31 followers. So some of you have not followed. So I don't know. I don't want to like nag you or anything, but if you could follow, that would be great. And yeah, I'll show the trailer one more time, and then I'm going to be going to bed pretty soon. But for now, enjoy. Bastion has always been the only city that matters. In its industrial age, it sits as the smoke-shrouded hub of mankind, surrounded by a world of lurking horrors and cosmic interference. The underground spreads beneath our feet, and the stars loom above. You are an explorer, braving places too far for maps and too old for records. Your expeditions touch the bizarre, wondrous, and horrific. You search for riches, but also arcana, mysterious devices with unnatural powers. Prepare yourself for a rules-light, flavor-heavy game of industrial horror and cosmic strangeness as you venture into the odd. So thank you to everybody that has stuck with me through this this stream, and yeah, I've like I say, I've been holding this information in so long now. It's strange to suddenly let it out, but I am hoping that I'm hoping it's not a disappointment, because I know that I hyped this up so much, and I tried to be honest and tell people, like, look, this isn't going to be a big reveal that I've secretly written 400 new pages of content, because I'm naturally quite transparent about these things, and I'm always wanting to talk about what I'm doing. So if you enjoy that, again, feel free. In fact, you should feel encouraged to go to the Kickstarter page and follow it. And unfortunately, I am going to be unbearable after September 21st. I am going to be coming on and ruining all your favorite podcasts and things like that. If you do run a podcast or a video stream or anything like that, get in touch, and I will obviously be trying to be everywhere, and until everyone is sick of the sight of me. And then October 21st, I can go away. So thanks again, and until next time, it's goodbye for now.